It seems every few months, Astro comes out with a big new feature that kind of revolutionizes how you work with Astro. And the most recent one, as of this recording, is Astro DB. Now, it's still technically an early preview, so I will likely be re-recording this module as they do more work. But for right now, I think it's enough in place that the core structure will be there. So I thought it'd be worth recording a module. Now, just to kind of overview what it is, and that's what this lesson will be about, it is an SQL database, SQLite, and it works both locally, and then you can also push it up and use it in production as well. Now, because it's SQLite, it's obviously really good for reading because they can distribute this all over the globe and you can get it quickly wherever you're at. It's not great for writing, so you wouldn't want to do like a real-time, chat bot or something like that with Astro DB. Probably not the best use case for it. But for many use cases, especially on content-driven sites, which is what Astro is really best at, it's a great solution. And on top of the Astro DB, which is basically just working with the database itself, both locally and in production, they also have something called Astro Studio, which we'll look at as well. It essentially allows you to have a production version of whatever you're going to produce in dev mode. We'll talk about that as we move through this module. Now, like I mentioned, it is SQL. It's an SQL database. It's using SQLite. It's actually using libSQL, which is like a fork of SQLite, if I understand it correctly. And it can scale as you need it to. And when you're not interacting with it, it costs you no money. And that's why they're offering this for free. You don't even have to put in your credit card. And if you have more advanced needs, you can obviously pay them if you want to. Now, the real power of this is that everything is automatically configured and set up for you. So you literally type in npx astro db, that's it, and then you're up and ready to go. And they're using Drizzle behind the scenes, so you get a TypeScript ORM. You don't have to set up any of that yourself, and you also don't have to write raw SQL queries. Of course, if you've used Drizzle before, you know that you can write raw SQL queries if that's something you want to do, but I'll leave that to you if you are into writing raw SQL queries. I'm going to be using the ORM. You can see here they've got a bunch of different scenarios here, like comments and forums, just kind of walking through different things you could do. They even have some basic ideas for how to work with auth as well, and there's more coming out on this that we'll look at here in future modules. Now, like I mentioned, it's really built for Astro, and just like you'd expect with Astro, the DX is amazing. You literally type in that one command, everything gets up and running, and then you just interact with your database locally. When you're ready, you can push it up to Astro Studio, and then you have it live in production. Now, the combination between Astro DB, which gives you a great local dev environment experience, along with Astro Studio, where you can actually publish it and interact with a live database, again, without spending any money to start with or even putting in your credit card, is kind of the benefit. So these two things put together. Now, the schema itself, it always lives in your database. You're not having to set up Docker or anything like that. It's just a local SQLite file, so it's really easy to get started with. You're just accessing a single file that it actually produces for you in dev mode in your .astro directory. Now, you also have access to things like webhooks when it comes to Astro Studio. So as things change, you can actually interact with those changes. And they've got a great CI story as well. So that way, as you push to GitHub, all your schema changes automatically are pushed to Astro DB. Of course, you can also do that from the command line, and we'll talk about that going forward as well. Like I mentioned, you don't have to spend any money or even put in your credit card to get started with. And if you need more than 1 billion requests read each month or 1 million written each month, then you can pay additionally for that. So a pretty generous free tier as far as I'm concerned for the kind of things I'm going to be building usually with Astro. All right, so that's at least an overview of what Astro DB is and what Astro Studio is. In the next lesson, we're going to actually set this up in a real-life project. Let's get started using Astro DB. All I did was use the CLI to generate a new Astro project that was a blank template. That's what I've got right over here. So if you want to follow along, you're welcome to do that and then jump right in. I've obviously got the dev server up and running as well. And this is how simple it looks when you use the blank template. Now, what we're going to do is jump over to the Astro DB docs, which you can find in the Astro docs. And all you have to do is add this command. It's just as simple as that. And you've got a database. So let's go ahead and do that. And in this lesson, we're just going to set up the thing and install it and kind of get the lay of the land of how to use it generally. And then we'll actually walk through it step by step going forward. So we'll go ahead and continue. Yes. And I'll let it scaffold out a database folder there for me and update my config, and we should be back up and running. Now, I should note here that you do need Astro 4.5 or later as of now. By the time you're watching this, this may have changed again. As they come out with this in a more full-fleshed version, I'll probably re-record this entire module. Okay, so that's all you have to do to get it up and running. Now, you can see over here that this DB folder contains a few files by default. So I'll come over here. You're going to see we get the config and we get the seed file. By coming to the config, you're going to see this exact same thing right here. And what we need to do now is define which tables are going to be present in our database. So as you can see, if I come down here, it's going to walk you through exactly what this might look like. So they've got comments here just to maybe mix it up. Let's change it up. We'll say these are things like links, since we're going to be applying this to our dev links project we did in the last module. So let's come up top here. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and define something. We're just going to call it links like this, uppercase. And I'm just going to define a table. You'll notice that you need to import this from Astro DB. The Astro extension should give you that. And you can see it pulls in up top there. Then all I need to do is define which columns are present there. So let's set columns here. And then this is an object where I defined both the name and then also what it contains. So in this case, we've got a few text fields. So we could use something like URL. This will simply be column. And again, this is something you have to import from Astro DB. That should have done that for me. And then we're going to set this to a text. Then we'll also do, maybe let's do a date just to say what date you saved it. So we'll do column dot and then date right here. And then we could do something like is read. And this would be column dot. And you can see we've got a Boolean type. Now you could also do additional things. So let's say you wanted to like upvote it or something like that. So for that, we could do like upvote num. This would again be column dot. And again, we can grab the number right off of here. Now we don't yet have an ID for this, and it's probably a good idea to have that. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do column dot number. And then inside here, we can actually pass an additional option here. This is just called primary key. Now this will both increment it and also make sure that this is unique. So I'll just set this to true and make sure I have a comma there. So now I've got a links table defined with an ID, a URL, a date, an isRead, and an upvote. We should probably also maybe have a title as well. So let's have a title with column.text. All right, we just created a bunch of work for ourselves because now we have to scaffold out schemas that include all that. But all I want to do down here is now export in this tables object the links. So these links now are going to be one of the columns available to me inside of my DB file. So all the config for your entire database takes place right inside this config.ts file. And eventually with Astro Studio, we can push all this up so that all the schema is actually expected by the studio itself. Now in the next lesson, what we're going to do is seed this database with local data. So far, we've got a config that includes one table with these columns right here. Now what we want to do is locally seed this database with actual content. And we actually have a file that's already set up for us right over here. It's got a default export. They've named it seed. You don't have to name anything, but the idea here is that you're going to actually insert into your database using this seed file. So this will be the starter code when you're working in dev mode. Now, if I come down this way, you're going to notice this is what we already looked at is all these different options here. The one I didn't talk about, which I probably should have, is this .json, which allows you to essentially do anything in a JSON format. All right, so now that we've done all that, I'm going to come down here to seed your database. So in development, Astro is going to use your local DB config to generate local types. Now those are all according to that schema that you set up. Now obviously you need real data to actually work in dev mode, and that's where this seed.ts file comes in. You're going to use the db.insert function. This again comes from Vercel behind the scenes. You don't have to set up any of this yourself. It actually allows you to insert stuff into that local dev database. Every time you restart your dev server, it will clear everything and read once again from your seed database right over here. Now, personally, I would love to see Astro allow you to keep changes you make in dev mode to your database, or at least have that as an option. And that way you really could locally just run this database file and never have to worry about pushing it up. If you're just reading from it, for instance, to build a statically generated site, that would be a great use case for that. But maybe that's in the works going forward. If that becomes the case, I'll make sure to update this video along with this whole module probably as well. But you can see all you have to do is await this db.insert command where you list the type of table you're inserting into and then the values in an array. So that's all we have to do. So let's go ahead and come over here and we're just going to await. And this is an async function. So we're set there, db.insert. Now here I need to name the table I want to insert into. And we name that links. And you'll notice it's already seeded that with Astro:/DB. If it doesn't do that, you can restart your dev server, but it should do that for you automatically. Then we're just going to simply insert a bunch of values, and these values should reflect the schema itself. This will be an array, and what we're going to do is have an object for each of these items. Now you don't actually have to provide an ID. It will do that for you since we went ahead and set that as a primary key over here. But what I'm going to do is grab all the rest of this and just dump it in right over here. All right, now for each of these, let's go ahead and just add some sample data. So I'll have like a title. And here I'll have something like google.com. For the date, we can actually do something a little bit better here if we wanted to. So if I jump back over this way, there are options I can pass into here as well. Now I don't want to get into all these details here, but you'll notice that I can pass in a default, and I can just use the now function that I can import from Astro DB, which defaults this to currently whenever I set this up. Now that means I don't have to have this date here. It'll actually insert that for me automatically along with that ID since I set that up as my primary key. Here we'll just say that this is true, and for the upvote number, we'll say something like 3. Okay, so we've actually got this now locally. I'm going to just copy this down and add a couple of more options. All right, so I've added 2 more sites, my coding public site and my blog that I never write on, but here you go. All right, so we've now got 3 different values. And if I open up my dev console here, you'll notice that each time I refresh, it actually gives me a new database based on this seed file. Now that we've got this seeded, in the next lesson, we're going to read from our local database and display the actual content somewhere on our site. We've configured our database, we've seeded it with initial data for dev mode. Now it's time to actually select items and display them somewhere on our site. Now, one quick thing to note, and I mentioned this in the very first video, is that in the .astro folder here, you've actually got a little database file. So it's actually building this locally. Again, it's just an SQLite file and really easy to work with. And you actually have access to it if you want. And you can open it up locally if that's something you want to do. Okay, so in here, you can see that all we have to do is use the drizzle ORM. Now, this is built in by default. We've been interacting with it already, even as we've set up our schema. You don't have to do anything yourself. Now, if you're not familiar with an ORM, it basically sits between you and your database and makes it easier to interact with your database by using common functions. Now, this does mean you have to kind of learn Drizzle to use Astro DB, but it's pretty easy to get started with for basic use cases, and they've got great documentation if you need more than that. Well, we're going to come down this way. You'll notice that all we have to do is await a selection from whatever table we want to. In this case, it would be our links. And then we can display them down below. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to open up my index.astro file. And in the front matter up here, all we're going to do is await that. So I'm going to come in here. We're going to await this. We'll call it links equals await DB. And again, you have to import this from Astro DB, which it should show you there. You can just hit enter and it should pull it in right there. We're going to just select off of this. And then we'll do .from, and then just go ahead and grab our links, again, from Astro DB. Now, why these don't import correctly, I'm not sure. I'm sure they'll fix this as you go, but for whatever reason, it does different imports just with this. So I'm sure a fix for that is coming, or maybe I'm messing something up. All right, down this way, though, let's go ahead and call this Astro DB. And then what we want to do is just map over each of our items. Now, I don't need to have the documentation open because, again, my schema is different anyhow, but also I can just come in here and say links.map, and it already knows everything that these are. So I could just call this a link. And because I get type safety here, I can simply have a div, and we could have something like a paragraph. And all I have to do is do link dot, and it knows everything I've got, right? So is, read, ID, title, all this kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and do the title. In fact, we should probably make this an anchor link, and that way we can go ahead and add the link dot URL directly in here. Now, remember we had a date as well. What I can do is come in here and grab my link dot, and I'm just going to grab my date directly here. And now because it knows it's a date, I can simply say it's to ISO string. This is the proper way to do the time tag here, the time tag here. And then right inside here, I can just grab my link.date, and I can just do to locale date string, and it should display that for me. So let's go ahead and hit enter and see that come in. So there you go. I've got the title, I've got coding in public, and I've got blog. So I've got 3 items, and these again come from our seeded database right over here. Now, what we can also do is have an is read property. So I'm just going to say is read, and here this will just be my link.isRead. Now, it says true, obviously, if it's true, but if it's false, nothing happens. So maybe we should change this up. We're just going to have a check mark here if it is read. Otherwise, we'll have something like an X. All right, that way we know kind of either way. And these need to be strings like this and like this. There we go. So we've got is read and is not read. And finally, let's go ahead and have our upvoted number. And this will just be our link.upvoteNum. And technically this is a number, so we should probably do toString. And that way we're ensuring it's a string there. Or you know what? Let's do one better. Let's come over here and add toLocale string. And there we go. So now it actually gives us the proper string we need. Now, just because I can't help myself and it's a little bit hard to read with some of these inline elements, let's come down here and add a style tag. And we're just going to grab the div and set this as display of grid. And we'll do a gap of 0.2 rem. Maybe let's also do a margin block 2 rem. And then let's do some padding, and let's add a border of 1 pixel, solid and black. Okay, cool. So there you can at least see all 3 of those items, separate items here. We've got the link, we've got the date, we've got is read, we've got upvoted, and it knows what everything is because it's using Drizzle behind the scenes to make this all type safe for us. Now, this is all fine and good for reading data in dev mode, but what we really want to do is be able to access this data in production. That's what we'll do in the next lesson when we connect this to Astro Studio. It's time to start working with a production database, and that would be using Astro Studio. Now, once again, you don't have to insert a credit card or anything like that. You just have to create a free account. And for most basic use cases, especially for this course, you're not going to be exceeding more than 1 million writes or 1 billion reads. Now you can see here there that you can click right here to connect to the Astro Studio platform. I've got it right over here, and I'm just using GitHub to log in. So let me go ahead and log in, and this will show any existing databases I already have using Astro Studio. Okay, so there we go. We've got some right here. What we're going to do now is come over here, and you can create a new project in a couple of different ways. Probably the easiest thing to do if you already have a project with GitHub is just to import it directly in Astro Studio, because it will actually create for you this GitHub CI action, which every time you push to GitHub will automatically migrate all your schema changes. You can also manually push them with this Astro DB push, which we can do here in a second. If you were to create a new project from scratch, all you literally have to do is import it, and that's it. And it takes care of everything else. Now, what we're going to do instead is create from the CLI, and that way we get the benefit of kind of doing all these pushes ourselves. But again, with that GitHub integration, it's really, really simple. So the very first thing I'm going to do is come over this way and just run that npx astro login command. Now, that should have logged you in because I already have an account, and it's already logged into GitHub, so we're set and ready to go. Next, I want to npx astro link. So let's come over here. We'll do npx astro link. And what this does is link my local project with a new project on Astro Studio. So I'll go ahead and say yes. Does it have an existing project? I will say no. So create a new project. Yes, please. Here, I'm just going to call this module 9 since it's my module 9 course. And then what I need to do is choose where I'm going to write to my database. Now, again, this is a distributed database when it's read, but what I'm looking for is when I'm going to write to it, which area do I want it to live in? Now, I live in the West, so I'm going to say this for North America, and it should create a new project for me automatically and link it to this local dev environment. Now, let's go ahead and come over this way, and let's go back to projects, and now you'll see I've got a module 9. And this module 9 has 0 tables so far because I haven't pushed up my schema. So let's go ahead and come back over this way. You'll notice that if I use npx astro db push, npx astro db push, it'll actually push my configuration file up to that remote database. So it says it's complete. Let's come back over here and we'll see if we've actually got a table. We do. So perfect. I'll click inside here. You'll notice it's got all the things we would expect, the things I had in my local config: an ID, a URL, a date, a title, an isRead, and an upvoted. So it's got all the things I would expect here now in my remote database. Now, obviously, my files themselves are local. This seed right here is local. So the next thing I want to do, let's jump back over to the Astro DB docs. I've already pushed the schema itself. Let's actually push some data. So if I want to use my seed file to push to my production, I can just use this flag right here, this Astro DB execute command, where I point it to the file name and use the -- remote flag. As soon as I do this, it takes all my seed data and it pushes it up to Astro Studio. So for instance, if you already have a bunch of data and you just want to get it up there quickly, this is a really easy way to do that. I come over here. Actually, it's right here, right? There's all 3 links with everything already included there. Pretty cool, right? All right, so now I've got all that set up and ready to go. Now, if I were to go ahead and get rid of all this right here, so let's get rid of a couple of these actually and just leave maybe the first one. And I restart my command over here, so npm run dev. And I come back over here. Obviously, I'm only going to have 1 right here. However, what if I want to start working with my actual production data? Well, let's come back over to the Astro DB docs. You'll notice that you can connect to it with this remote flag in dev or when you're building. Now, it is really important to note, of course, that once you're actually interacting with the production database, any changes you make are going to be perpetuated, right? Because it's actually working with the production database. But if I were to come over here, let's go ahead and change up my package file, my package.json. I'll kill this right here. And here, I'm simply going to add the remote flag. Now, if I come back over here and npm run dev, it's no longer going to just show one thing. It'll show all 3 things. And the reason that is because it's actually connecting to the remote database. You see that right over here. So if I refresh, now it should show my actual live production data reading directly from Astro Studio. Again, this is an actual published database at this point. Now, what I typically do is I have a dev db command, and I say typically because I've just started working with this as it's just released, where that allows me to interact with my remote database just to make sure everything looks proper. But most of the time, I'm obviously just working in dev mode with my seeded files. Now, this is for working in dev mode. What happens if you actually want to build using your remote data? Well, you can do that right here with this remote flag. So typically when I'm building, I don't want to be using my local data, right? My seed database. I want to be using my remote data. So I'm going to come over here and just add the remote flag right here. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this. And then I'll just use the npm run build command. Now this will use my build and it will use the remote data because obviously I'm going to be wanting to build from my actual production data instead of my seed data. So notice it connects to the remote database, it grabs all the stuff and generates the files. That means if I come over here, we look inside of my dist folder here, you're going to see that I've got this file right here. And notice it's just static data because I'm using SSG mode. If I save this so that it reformats, you'll notice that in here what I've got is all the data from my actual live production database, all 3 of those items, and it's built now into the site, again, using SSG mode. Obviously, if this was SSR, we'd be using that, and I'll show you how to do that in the next lesson. Okay, so that's a little bit about connecting with Astro Studio, along with how to work with your production data while you're in dev, and also while you're building in static site generation mode. Now, if you're going to deploy this somewhere, you actually need to pass along an environmental variable. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk about deploying this somewhere live on the web, and also that connection with GitHub, so that as you push up your code to GitHub, it will automatically take your DB schema and push it live to Astro Studio. We've now got everything working with our production data. You can see here I've got 3 items, and that's what I've got over here in my links. It's actually pulling live from this because I'm using the dev DB command that we set up earlier. Now what I want to do in this video is go ahead and connect this to a live production database on build using a service that I'm going to use called Netlify. Now I've used this before. We'll probably use Vercel in a later one just to show you how to do it in 2 different places, but there's one kind of extra step we need to do. I also then want to set up the CI GitHub integration, which again, if you're starting the project from Astro Studio's UI, it will do all this work for us, but just in case you ever have to do it yourself, I figured I would show you how to do it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and then we'll talk a little bit about SSR too. So let's go ahead and start first of all with just connecting this on build to Netlify. So the first thing I need to do is come over here. Let's just go ahead and kill this, and I'm going to open up my GitHub account and create a new GitHub repository, and I'm just going to come over here and call this Astro DB module 9 Netlify. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to private. Now, if you prefer to do all this from the command line or any other version, that's fine. Basically, you just need to connect your local code to some kind of repository on GitHub, and that's what I'm doing right here. So let's go ahead and come down here. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this here because I've already got this initialized as a Git repository. I just need to add a remote, and that's what I'm going to do down here. So if that all worked, it should be over here when I refresh, and my code shows up. Okay, perfect. So I've got my code in here. Now what I want to do is connect this over to Netlify. So let me come over to my Netlify account. I'm just going to add a new site, and I'm going to import an existing project. So over here, let's go ahead and search our repos. This is module 9. There it is. Let's click this, and it should go ahead and just deploy it for me automatically. Now I can give this a site name if I want to. So let's do like Astro course module 9. And then let's check its availability just to make sure it is, and it is. So perfect. Now, before I go ahead and deploy this, I want to add an environmental variable. Now, whenever you're working with your production data, you need to have this variable that you use to essentially connect the Astro Studio to your actual build process. If I come back over here, in fact, it'll talk me through this. Let's see if I come into this deploy with a studio connection guide and jump over here. It shows you that you need something called an Astro _studio _app _token. It has to be spelled exactly like this. You're going to set this up on whatever environment you're using. So what I'm going to do is come over to Netlify, and we're just going to go ahead and click Add New Variable. We'll name it this, and the value I'm going to actually get from Astro Studio. So back over this way, we're going to come over here to the settings for this particular module 9 database that I have. We'll come under tokens. We're going to generate a new token. I'm just going to call this Netlify, and then I'll generate this. Now, you should not show this to anybody. I will delete this before this video is live because otherwise you get access to my Astro Studio, which I don't want you to have. Okay, so I will delete that, but you don't have to as long as nobody else sees it. And I'm going to jump back over here and just add this in as the value. Okay, so that should be good and ready to go. I'm now going to deploy my Astro course module 9. Now notice, because I have my build command, in fact, if I come over here just to double check, my package.json now includes this remote flag for my build command. It will then try to reach out to Astro Studio, and because of this key value pair, it will be able to do that because I've given Netlify permission. So I'll go ahead and deploy Astro course module 9. With a little magic of editing, it is now done, and I can come over here and open up this site, and it should be live, and it's used my production data. Now, this is still just using static site generation mode, so there's something else we'll want to do here in a moment when we move it to SSR. But that's kind of the first step. So if you're building it and you're letting a environment build it for you, like Netlify or Vercel or something like that, you need to make sure you pass along that key value pair that, again, you'll generate over in your dashboard. Now, notice there are also webhooks you can use as well. I'm not going to go into that right now until they flesh this out a little bit more. The next thing I want to talk about, though, is setting up that CI action. Now, personally, my preference would be that if you're going to add Astro Studio connection, you go ahead and do it from the UI, so it does all this for you. But if you don't and you want to actually manually do it, that's just fine. So I'm going to come over here and look at this documentation. I'll have links to all this down below. And you'll see that this GitHub CI action, you can either have Astro Studio's UI do it, or you can manually do it yourself if you want to. So I guess we can do that. We're going to first of all follow GitHub's documentation to configure a new secret in your repository. Now we've already done this. It's going to have the same name as what we did to Netlify. We'll just create a separate token. So let's go ahead and follow this link right here, and we'll jump over this way. Now what's saying here is you're going to go to your settings, you'll click underneath security and then secrets, and you're going to add a new repository secret. You'll provide the name, the secret, and you'll add secret. So just like that, should be pretty easy to go. So let's come back over this way, and I'll scroll to the top and under settings, and then secrets and variables. This will be GitHub action. Let's go ahead and add a new repository secret. So the secret name, we know what that's supposed to be. That's just our Astro Studio app token. Now the secret, we actually want to create a separate one here as well. So I've already got one for Netlify. Let's do one for GitHub as well. So I'll generate this. And once again, you want to make sure that you don't show this to anybody else, but I am to you because I'm going to remove it. Now I'll go ahead and add the secret. This allows GitHub now to have access to Astro Studio as well. So now I've done the first thing. Let's see, back over here. Now what we need to do is add a .github folder and a /workflows, and then we can use this essentially, right? So let's come back over this way, and we're going to go to actions. We'll just go ahead and set up a workflow ourselves. Now this has already created a .github folder and has a workflows. That's very much like what we see over this way, right? .github and workflows. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab all of this right here, and I can just copy it right here. And this secrets line right here is what it's going to use in GitHub to look up that exact name. And that's why we had to name it this exact thing. Now what it's going to do is anytime you push on main, it will go ahead and basically connect to this, and you'll see that it uses the Astro Studio and updates your Astro Studio's config. So that's what we need to do. We've already copied this over. Let's just name it _studio.yaml since that's they've got here as well. So we'll do _studio.yaml, and we'll go ahead and paste this in. Okay, so let's go ahead and commit these changes, and that should work just fine. And now this essentially connects this with my Astro Studio. And just to make sure we keep everything in sync, let me come over here and just sync those changes down. And there's my .github folder with my studio file right here. And remember, we've added the secret in the GitHub UI. Now what that means is if I were to change anything about my config, so that would be over here, my config right here, whenever I push up to my repository, it should now update my actual Astro Studio production database as well. So for instance, let's say I came down here and it had another one that was like, is cool or something like that. And this was a column.boolean. I've updated my config right here, right? So now if I go ahead and commit this, so let's come back over here and I'll just do it right here. We'll say like updated config, and I commit it right here, and then I push it up. If I jump back over here, oh, right here, it should actually have grabbed that code, and you see it is updating that config right here. That means if I come back over this way and look at my database, and I move this thing over, see, I'm not seeing anything updated here. And I think the reason is I didn't give this a default value for all these, so it doesn't know what to do with it. So let's just double check that that's the case. So let's click right here. It says all checks have failed. Let's check the details, and I bet that's what it is. So it tries to push. Let's see what it's doing. Yeah, so it's added links. It's cool. It's trying to actually push that up to my production, but it has no default value, so it doesn't know what to do with the existing table. So I could go ahead and force push it from the command line, or I could just give it a default value for all those as well. That would also work. So right now, let's go ahead and come back over this way. Let's open up the config again, and we'll just set the default here, and we'll set it to true. Okay, so now they all should be true, and I think this should work for us, so let's go ahead and try again. Update config again. Commit, and we'll push. Let's come over here and just see how this works. All right, there it goes. It's actually working, and let's check out the details as it builds. Okay, so it looks like it got through everything it needed to do. Let's come over here now and check this out. If I move this over here, you're going to see now it has is cool true, and that happened automatically using that GitHub CI action. Now, because we connected this to Netlify and I have it building also whenever I make any changes, this should also be up to date. Now, it's not going to look any different because I didn't change the UI at all, but you can actually see down here that we failed, and then we updated and it actually worked that time. So you can see it was actually trying to build with the data. It just obviously failed when our GitHub CI action failed as well. Now, the last thing I want to do is talk about how to set this up with server-side rendering. So let's go ahead and come over here, and I'm going to go ahead and add Netlify as my server-side adapter. You might remember that's npx astro add, and we're just going to add Netlify. I'll let it install that dependency. It can update my config, and we should be set and ready to go. Now that this is server-side rendered, it's whenever I go to my site that it will actually fetch that production data. So let's go ahead and push this up, and I'll come over here. We'll just say like move to SSR. All right, so back over here, this should be building. So let's come over here and watch it build just to make sure everything is working. All right, cool. We're set and ready to go. Now I should be able to come over here, and this should be working as well. So So it looks like it is building now as we move to SSR. Okay, so it's published. Now, that means if I come to my final site, which is right here, this is actually pulling live from the production database whenever I hit refresh. That means if I come over here and we add something else, so let's add a new link. So I'm going to give it an ID and it'll generate that itself. Let's come over here and just do like google.com. We'll leave this alone. It can just use the current timestamp and we'll be like, cool link. For Boolean, let's set this to false. And Israel will set this to false, and upvote number will set it to 4. Now, if I save this row, this will be added to my production database. Obviously, I'm doing this manually over here. But now if I come back over here and refresh, you'll notice since this is server-side rendered, it can actually go out and grab that link automatically when I refresh. Now, this example is only so useful because it really doesn't make a lot of sense to have a database only for getting data. In this case, I'd probably be using content collections. Really, the power of the database is being able to write and read, whereas with content collections, you're really only reading from them, which this is a perfect use case for something like content collections. But let's start easy here with just reading data. And in the next section of this module, we'll then look at posting and patching and deleting data from this live production database. Now, in the next section, we're going to take that DevLinks project we worked on and swap out all the interactions we had with JSON Server for Astro Studio. That means we'll update our get, our post, our patch, and our delete endpoints, and that way they'll be interacting with Astro Studio instead of that local JSON file, which isn't very helpful for production. In other words, we'll build out a full CRUD app with an actual live database courtesy of Astro DB. So far, we've seen how to interact with Astro DB just reading from it. But obviously, the real power here is being able to write to it. So what I want to do is take our DevLinks project and upgrade it to use Astro DB. So first of all, you can go and grab the downloaded code in the description. And you do want to use that downloaded code because it includes some new updates to Astro DB in the latest version of Astro. And I've updated the code to include that. Once you do that, go ahead and come in here and npm install it. I've already done that, and that will install all the dependencies. Now, you might remember we used JSON Server. So what we're going to do is go ahead and start with JSON Server and then add in Astro DB slowly kind of as we go. So let's start with npm run server, which was a command we wrote that runs that server script. And that should get this up and running at /links at localhost 3000. Next, I want to come in here. Let's go ahead and add another one here. I'm going to add another terminal, and here we're going to do npm run dev. And here we'll run npm run dev. This will actually get our Astro site up and working. So here it is right here. We're reading from our JSON server file. And if you want to know, you can just go to db.json, and you can see that this is the sample link. That's the only one showing over here. Now, this should be fully functional, so we should be able to add links, delete links, update links, all this kind of stuff. And again, what we want to do is convert this to use Astro DB instead. So in this lesson, we're going to install Astro DB, set up the config, and get our seed file up and running so that we can actually load from this data. First thing I'm going to do is kill what we just started, this server right here, and install npx astro add db. And the CLI should walk me through the installation process. I'll let it create the necessary files and update my config. Okay, so let's get this thing back up and running. And I'm going to open up the sidebar, and the next thing we're going to do is set up our config right here. Again, we're going to be using the same kind of structure that we have currently in the project. The first thing I want to do, though, is go ahead and declare a constant. We're going to call this links. And here I just need to define a table. And when you're grabbing this define table function, you just want to make sure you grab it from the astro:/db, not the node modules. So I'm going to do that. And this table should have columns, and the columns are going to reflect the actual data. So if I want to check what that looks like, I can come back over here to my db.json. It looks just like this. So I'm going to go and grab this, and we'll just drop it in right here. Now here, as you can see, we've got an ID. We can let this be incremented automatically by Astro DB. We've got 3 different text fields, and then we've got a Boolean field. Now, if I jump over to the Astro DB docs, which you should do if you ever get stuck at any point, you'll see that we have access to stuff like that. So for instance, column.text gives me a text field. Column.boolean gives me a Boolean field, etc., etc. Now, if we had more complex data, we could just do a column.json, and we could pass in a JSON object there. What we're going to do is come over here, and for this one, I'm going to do column, which again has to be imported from Astro DB, .number. And then you might remember we can pass in an optional object here where we have something called a primary key, and I'm just going to set this to true. Now this will mean that Astro increments this and that it has to be unique. Now for this next couple of sections, let's grab this one and this one and this one. For all these, I'm just going to replace this with column.text, just like that. Now I had an extra line here just because of the way that wrapped, and then I need to add commas after all these. Okay, last thing to update here is column.boolean. Now, if I wanted to, I could set this value as a default of false, but I'm just going to leave it alone because we're going to actually grab that from the front side like we did earlier with JSON Server. Now, down here, I just need to export the links table and that way it's part of my defined DB. Okay, great. So we got that set up. Let's go ahead and come over to our seed database now. If I come up here, you might remember, let's actually scroll down just so we get used to using the documentation. All I have to do is await a db.insert command. This is already an async function. Let's close the sidebar. I'm not sure why I didn't do that earlier, but let's await db. And this will just be insert. And then I want to insert into a specific table. That would be my links table. And the values I want to insert should be inside an array, and it's an object with all of these values. Now I'm going to get rid of the ID because that should be generated automatically, but you'll notice that now everything works. The reason the ID wasn't working is because I didn't have it as a type of number here. It's just a string, and so it was kind of freaking out on me. Okay, so we've got that up and running, and if I look at the dev server here, now you can see that we actually have seeded the database, and it knows that a new local database is created and ready to go. Now let's open up the index.astro page, and you'll notice that all I'm doing is awaiting this request from my getlinks.json file. Now because our server-side endpoint is doing all the logic, all we have to do is update this file right here, and it will no longer use JSON server, but Astro DB. We're going to use the same kind of querying method that we did before. So just like we did here, await.select from comments, that's what we're going to do in this getlinks file. So lastly, let's come over here to getlinks.json.ts. And here you'll see that when we hit this get endpoint, we're just doing a fetch to our JSON server. So this is the line I have to replace, and then everything else should pretty much be the same, right? It's going to actually send back all of the data right here, and that's what I want. So let's come up here, and this time we're just going to await DB, and I do need to grab that from Astro DB.select, and the table we're going to select is the links table. Now I don't need to do any of this anymore, so let's get rid of all of this, and here I'm just going to return the request like that. Now, if I come back over here and I refresh, it should look the exact same, and that's because we seeded our database with the same data. So we're going to do sample link 2, and now you see that it's actually hot module reloading, which is one of the cool things about Astro DB. It just works automatically as you update your config or your seed file. It just updates in dev mode automatically. So we installed Astro DB, we set up our config, we seeded our database, and we replaced our endpoint for getting all of our files with Astro DB. So we're no longer using JSON server to get, but obviously we would still be posting to JSON server, and it's obviously not going to update live. So that's what we'll do in the next lesson. We've now got this project working where it's reading from our Astro DB database, but when we go to add a link, it's still going to use JSON server. So that's what we want to update in this lesson. Now, I've got the docs open over here still. I did want to mention that we're just going to very surface level look at the Drizzle API. So we just selected everything and that's it. But there's a lot more you can do with Drizzle, like get really specific in your queries. And eventually we're going to hit some projects where we have to do some more complex querying. But for now, I just wanted to point that out, that if you want to do that, go ahead and come over here. What we need to do though is to insert. This allows you to take user input and then actually add it to your Astro DB database. Now they're showing an example here with a post on a specific page where you're submitting to that page and doing all this server side. However, we already have an endpoint set up, so all we need to do is look at how to actually insert things. So let's see, right here, yeah. So this is all we need to think about, which is just inserting, and it looks the exact same. You just use the insert command and then pass along some values. So this looks exactly like what we did in our seed file. So let me come over here and then let's look at that dialog component because that's where we did all the work. So if I come down here, you're going to notice that when we submit to this page, again, and we did this earlier, that you're going to grab all the data that we need. We're going to then send all this to our endpoint here as data, the title, the description, the URL, and the isRead. And all this will hit an endpoint called addLink.json. So that's where we need to change things up. So let's come over here, addLink.json. Let's kind of follow the trail. So inside here, we're going to get all the data. We're going to make sure that it's the right type. And then we're going to hit this endpoint right here. Now, because we were using a simple fetch before, we had to pass along all this stuff just like this. We can replace all that and all this as well. And then finally, we can update this response just slightly. So let's come over here. We're going to replace all this right here. Now, I do want to get rid of all this, but just because we're using the sanitize function, I don't want to have to recopy all that. So let's go ahead and come in here and we'll do a request again. We'll do await from Astro DB, which should be DB like this, and it should have imported up top. There we go. We'll do dot insert. And then now we need to give the table, and that table is called links. And again, we'll import that from Astro DB. And then we're simply going to pass along the values, and we're just going to pass along the actual values that we got from the form. So that will be right here, right? So let's grab all this and drop this in here. All right, so we uncommented all that, and now that should work. And if I come over here and get rid of this, we no longer need to check on this. And then this request is sent back. So I think we're actually all good now. All right, let's check to see if this is working properly. Let's come back over here. We're going to add a new link. We'll say like link to something else. And then We'll make this go to google.com. We'll say it's isread, and we'll add the link. And there you go. It added the link for us automatically. And if I were to come over here and actually inspect inside of here in this content.db file, I don't have a way to view this currently in this version of my VS Code, but you would see that I have that extra item in here. Now, if I were to restart my dev server, it's only going to pull from my seed data. So eventually we're going to need to push this up to production so that we can actually perpetuate links that we've saved. So we're now getting all the data from Astro DB. We're adding new data to Astro DB. However, if I come over here and I try to delete something, you'll notice that it's not deleting, and that's because it's still using JSON server. Same thing for isread. If I refresh, it'll just be back because it's not using our actual live data in Astro DB. So those are the next two things we need to change. I've restarted my dev server since the last video, so now you can see I'm back to just the seeded data. But what we want to do is update this right here, and we want to use this so we can delete and patch things. So if we were to jump over to our card, which is the link card right here, you'll notice that we're doing both of those checks right here, the isread, and then up top here, I think we're using the delete. Both of them hit our API endpoint that's dynamic. So it's using the actual ID and passing that along. So if I jump over here, the thing we need to update is this right here. And because these are so related, we're going to do these both kind of at the same time. So let's go ahead and start with the delete response, since that's how it's listed in the DOM. And you'll notice that we're hitting a fetch endpoint and just deleting that individual item. Now, if I jump back over to the docs for Astro DB and I scroll down this way, you'll notice that we can do something very much the same. Here, we're simply going to delete the item. In this case, this would be links for us, dot where it equals the comment ID. This would be our links ID is the same as the context params.id. So we're just doing a simple check to make sure that they line up. So up top here, you might remember I've got the ID right here. This is what we're going to check against when we look at all of the items in our links table. So let's go ahead and grab this right here. And we're just going to await DB, again, imported from Astro DB, dot delete. And then we're just going to look at our links. And again, I'll hit enter to import that, dot where. And then we're going to do a little equation here. I'm going to use the EQ. Again, I have to pull this in from Astro DB, where my links.id. So that's the ID created by Astro DB when I add to my database, where that equals, in this case, I'm just going to pass the ID. Now you'll notice here I'm getting a bit of a TypeScript error. And if I hover over this, it's going to tell us that they don't match because one is a string and the other is a number. So let's go ahead and just convert this to a number explicitly. So I'll say this is a type of number now, and then it should be able to look this up and find it correctly. So if there's an error, it'll pass along an error. Other than that, we can just send back this response with the status of 204 to tell us that it's been successfully deleted. So hopefully that worked. Let me come back over this way and let's just see if we can delete it. There we go. And if I refresh, it is gone, gone, gone. All right, so let's come down here and restart the server so we actually have something. And again, it will pull now from our seed database, which means it should be back. There it is. Okay, perfect. So we did the first thing, and I don't even need to name this right here, so let's just get rid of that. The second thing we're going to do is come down this way, and we're just simply going to patch. Now, we're going to use the same kind of idea where we grab the ID, except in this case, we actually need to pass along data as well, right? So if I come over here, and if you were to search along here, you'll notice that it gives us some filtering options and stuff like that, but it doesn't actually give us anything for patching data. What I'm going to do, though, is just click this drizzle insert API reference. And if we jump over here, we should see this update option. Now, because the way we have this thing structured, this makes the most sense to me. So you'll notice we do the same kind of lookup where we use the EQ to check against something. In this case, it would be our ID that matches the ID passed in. And then we simply just pass in the data that we want updated. So this should look very similar to what we just did a moment ago. So let me come down here. And instead of all this stuff right here, we can get rid of this. And now we're simply going to await db.update. And here we're going to update our links. And we'll set the isread. And that's the thing that's been passed in. So I can just pass it just like that. Or I can do isread:isread. That's just JavaScript stuff. Isread. And then I just want to check where this condition is met. So what I'll check against is the links.id is equal to, and I'll just do a comma and then pass in the number of the ID like that. So it's going to update that specific item. So let's come over here. We'll get rid of all this. And you know what? This should be a status code of 200, right? Because we're just adding something. Okay, so I think that should work. Let's come back over this way. If I refresh here, you'll see that this is not red. If I refresh after clicking it, it now is red, which means it's actually changing this in our database file. That means we've successfully moved everything over from JSON server to now be using Astro DB. Full credit operation, reading, writing, updating, and deleting. In the next lesson, let's connect this up to Astro Studio, and then finally we'll push this up live somewhere. In the next lesson, we'll connect this with Astro Studio, and then finally we'll actually push it up live in production. Okay, let's get this thing up live somewhere. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach than we did last time, and that way we won't have to set up our own GitHub CI action. So let me come over here, and we're just going to create a new Git repository here in GitHub. And I'm going to call this dev links Astro course module 9. And I'm going to set this to private for now and just create this new repository. And then finally, let's go ahead and copy this right here. I've already got it initialized locally here, so I can just add this and it will push everything up to this remote branch. Just like that, it should be updated right over here. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and close this down here. And next, I'm going to open up Astro Studio. We're going to create a new project. And here, I want to just import it from a GitHub repo. Now let's just move this over so it can see. And there you go. This is the one we want. Now this just asks where it should write to. In my case, I want to change this to West. You can change it wherever you want to. Again, the database is distributed everywhere for reading, so it's really fast for reads, just a little bit slower for writes, and so you want to pick the right one for you. Confetti and all, we are ready to go. Now notice what it's done is created the CI action, and it's also actually added it for us here in the dashboard. I'm going to come over here and just refresh, and this should pull down the new change. There it is. It's got the .github where it's got the Studio YAML file that we manually created last time. You don't have to do that if you start it here in the UI. Okay, so that's the first thing. We've actually got it up and available now for us, but we have to link this local project. So if I come back over here, what we still need to do is we need to go ahead and log in. And let's see, I think the link here tells you to do that. Yeah, so this is what we're going to do next. So let's npx astro login, and then we could just npx astro link. So let's close down the sidebar so we can see this a little bit better, but npx astro link. This will link our local project with that specific Astro Studio database. So it's asking, do we want to link? Yes. Existing project? Yes. It's already up there now this time, so we don't have to create it from here. And then I can just pick it directly here. So this would be the dev links Astro course module 9. Perfect. And now we're set and ready to go. Now I can push. However, whenever I change anything, it will actually push for me automatically because it's got that CI action. Let's go ahead and just push though to start with, and that way we get all the initial data up there. And I should say not initial data, we're just pushing the configuration, right? So if I come back over here, now that it's ready, it should have one table and it's got all this stuff, but no data quite yet. Now we can actually push with the actual data. Let's come back, actually move backwards. This is the original data file. This is the Astro DB docs. So I just went back in my browser and I can use this Astro DB execute and we'll seed everything with our seed command. Again, you wouldn't necessarily need to do this. You could just start working with your remote database directly if you wanted to. But now we're actually pushing up the seed file as kind of starter code that will actually impact the production database. So if I refresh here, you'll see that there's our sample link 2 that just came from our seed file. Okay, perfect. So let's actually work now with our production database. To do that, I'm going to open up my package.json file. We'll create another one here. We'll call this devdb, and I'll just set this with a remote flag. Now I want to do the same thing for my build command, which we'll here update in a second. But now I should be able to say npm run devdb, and this should now be using our production database instead of our local database for dev. So here it is. You can't really tell because, again, I used the same wording, so not super smart. But if I were to come over here and add like another one, something here, and we add a link, you'll notice that it adds it to my actual production database. So if I come back over here, there it is right there, right? Now, by the way, you can't like right click this thing. There's no delete button. You actually have to just hit the delete key, which is a little weird. So that's something that it took me forever to figure out, but now you can delete that if you want to. Of course, we could have just deleted it from the UI, which probably would have been smart to make sure that that was working, but I'm pretty confident that we're set and ready to go. Now, really the last thing to do is to connect this up with Vercel. And in order to do that, I need to make sure I go to the settings for this database and create a token. Now, it's already got a GitHub token it created for me automatically. Let's call this Vercel. And again, I will delete this after this video is done so you don't see, so you don't have access to it. But for now, I'm going to use this one right here. And now I need to come back over here. And if I look at my package.json, you'll notice I'm not using Vercel. I started using Netlify here, right? So we're going to do a couple things. npm uninstall. That's just the AstroJS Netlify package. So I need to get rid of that. Let's come over to my Astro config. Obviously, if you set this up from scratch, you're not going to have to do all this. But since we already had it using Netlify, and I wanted to just show you how to use it with something else, I'm going to get rid of all this right here. And then we'll just npx astro add, and there's a Vercel adapter as well. So we're just swapping out adapters, basically. So yes, we'll update the dependencies, and we'll update my config, and everything should be set and ready to go. So that means I should be able to just commit this. So let's come over here, and that's what we'll do. So I'll say switched to Vercel, and then we'll commit and we'll push this. Now, if we had changed anything in our config file, that would actually be captured here by the database as well, right? But now what we need to do is actually hook this up to Vercel and use this token right here as well. So let's come over here to Vercel, and I'm just going to add a new project. And this is the one I want to use right here, right? This devlinks Astro. Now, just like with Netlify, you can add an environmental variable directly here. So I'm going to add this in here, and we need to grab the name that it needs to have. So I'm going to come over here to this Deploy Studio Connection Guide, just so I don't have to remember what it's called. It's Astro Studio App Token. Back over here, let's just add this in right here, and that way it will have everything it needs to actually use Astro DB when it builds this site out for me. So I'll add this, and I'll just click Deploy. Okay, just like that, we should be live, and if I come over here to my domain, I should have access here to this dev links. But if I add like a title 2 and something here, and like Google, and I add the link, this should be using my production database. There it is right there. And if I jump back over this way, we look at the database, it should have both of those there. So this is actually live right now on the web. Will I keep this up so that you can just spam this with random links? Probably not, because of the internet and how the internets. But at least you can see how this whole process works. Now, there's a lot more that could be said about Astro DB and Astro Studio, and as they build this out a little bit more, I will go ahead and expand this module and or record sections that need re-recording. But I trust this module has been a help both in how it works and also how to convert a previous project to now be using Astro Studio. In the next module, we'll look at another important feature of Astro, and that is the concept of middleware.